For years, the Allied world had dreamed of this moment. The opening of a second front. The liberation of Europe. But before victory could be achieved, the Atlantic Wall and Hitler's armies had to be shattered. Today, we delve into the largest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day, and the brutal 80-day campaign that followed, as the Allies fought for every inch of French soil. This was a battle of deception, unparalleled logistics, and ultimate human courage. This is the moment the fate of Western Europe was decided. This is the Battle of Normandy. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1944, along the coast of Normandy in northern France, the greatest amphibious invasion in history was about to begin. Across the choppy waters of the English Channel came an armada so vast it seemed to cover the sea. Over 5,000 ships and landing craft carrying 156,000 Allied soldiers toward 5 beaches on the Norman coast. For 4 years, Hitler's fortress Europe had seemed impregnable. From Norway to the Spanish border, from the Atlantic coast to the gates of Moscow, German forces occupied a continental empire. Britain stood defiant but isolated. The Soviet Union bled in a titanic struggle on the Eastern Front. And America, though now fully committed to the war, had yet to strike directly at the heart of German power. But on this morning in June 1944, that was about to change. This is the story of the Battle of Normandy, D-Day, and the 85 days that followed, the campaign that would crack open Fortress Europe and begin the final march to Berlin. The need for a second front in Western Europe had been debated for years. Stalin, fighting the bulk of the German Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, had been demanding it since 1942. Churchill, remembering the slaughter of the First World War, was cautious, advocating peripheral operations in North Africa, Italy, and the Balkans. Roosevelt and his military advisors pressed for a direct assault on Western Europe, the shortest route to Germany and the quickest way to end the war. By late 1943, the decision had been made. In 1944, the Allies would invade France. The operation would be called Overlord, and it would be the largest, most complex military operation ever attempted. Command of the invasion was given to General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Eisenhower, a career officer who had never commanded troops in combat before the war, had proven himself a masterful coalition commander in North Africa and Italy. His greatest strength was not tactical brilliance, but the ability to manage the enormous egos and competing interests of British, American, Canadian, and other Allied commanders. Ground forces for the invasion would be commanded by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the hero of El Alamein, meticulous, confident, and intensely focused on methodical preparation. Montgomery's planning would be crucial to Overlord's success, though his cautious execution would later prove controversial. Opposing them was the German military, still formidable despite 3 years of losses on the Eastern Front. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's system of coastal fortifications stretching from Norway to Spain, was defended by Army Group B, commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox. Rommel understood that the Allies would invade somewhere in France in 1944. His challenge was to determine where and to ensure German forces were positioned to throw the invaders back into the sea. Rommel believed the invasion had to be defeated on the beaches, that if the Allies established a foothold, their overwhelming air and material superiority would make ejecting them impossible. Above Rommel was Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, who disagreed with Rommel's approach. Rundstedt wanted to hold armored reserves inland and counterattack once the Allied landing site was clear. This disagreement, where to position the panzer divisions, would prove crucial when the invasion came. But the most important battle was already being fought, not with guns and tanks, but with information and deception. The Allies knew that German forces outnumbered what could initially be landed in France. If the Germans concentrated their forces at the actual invasion site, the landing might fail. The solution was deception, to convince the Germans that the main invasion would come not in Normandy, but at the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the channel, 150 miles northeast of the actual target. The deception operation was called Fortitude, and it was one of the most elaborate and successful intelligence operations of the war. Fortitude South created an entirely fictitious army, the first U.S. Army group, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton and based in southeast England opposite Calais. The Germans believed Patton was America's finest general, which he arguably was, and assumed he would command the invasion. False radio traffic suggested a massive force preparing to invade at Calais. Dummy tanks and landing craft were positioned where German reconnaissance could photograph them. Double agents, controlled by British intelligence, fed false information to the Germans confirming that Calais was the target. Physical deception created the illusion of enormous preparations in southeast England. Even Patton himself participated, making public appearances in the region to reinforce the deception. The deception worked brilliantly. Hitler and the German High Command became convinced that the main invasion would come at Calais. When the Normandy landings occurred, German commanders believed, for crucial days afterward, that this was a feint, that the real invasion at Calais was yet to come. This belief kept German reserves, particularly crucial panzer divisions, positioned near Calais when they desperately needed in Normandy. By late May 1944, everything was ready. Over 150,000 troops were assembled in southern England, along with thousands of vehicles, tons of supplies, and the enormous fleet of ships that would carry them to France. The invasion had been scheduled for June 5th, when tides and moon phases would be optimal for both the amphibious landings and the airborne operations. But on June 4th, the weather turned foul. Storms swept the channel. High winds, rough seas, and low clouds made an invasion impossible. Eisenhower postponed for 24 hours. On the evening of June 4th, Eisenhower met with his senior commanders and meteorologists. The weather forecast for June 6th was marginal, a brief window of acceptable conditions, but far from ideal. Seas would be rough. Cloud cover would hamper air support. But the forecast suggested this brief window was the best they could expect for weeks. Eisenhower faced the decision alone. If he canceled again, the operation would have to be postponed for weeks until tides and moon phases aligned again, and by then, German intelligence might discover the invasion plans. If he launched in marginal weather, the operation might fail catastrophically, with enormous casualties and no second chance. Eisenhower made his decision. Okay, we'll go. The invasion of Normandy, Operation Neptune, the amphibious phase of Operation Overlord, would begin in the early morning hours of June 6, 1944. There was no turning back. The invasion of Normandy began not on the beaches but in the air. Shortly after midnight on June 6, 1944, over 13,000 American paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions jumped from transport aircraft over the Cotentin Peninsula in western Normandy. Their mission was to secure the western flank of the invasion, to capture key bridges and causeways, to block German reinforcements, and to sow confusion behind enemy lines. The drops were chaotic. High winds, German anti-aircraft fire, and navigation errors scattered the paratroopers across miles of Norman countryside. Units were separated. Officers landed far from their men. Equipment was lost. But the very chaos helped the mission. The Germans, finding small groups of American paratroopers everywhere, couldn't determine where the main threat was. On the eastern flank, the British 6th Airborne Division had a more specific mission: capture the bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River, and destroy bridges over the Dives River to prevent German armor from reaching the beaches. In one of the most famous small unit actions of D-Day, a company of British glider troops landed within yards of Pegasus Bridge over the Caen Canal, captured it in minutes, and held it against German counterattacks, the first objective of D-Day secured within minutes of midnight. At approximately 5:50 a.m., as dawn broke over the channel, the Allied fleet opened fire. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, hundreds of warships, bombarded German coastal defenses. The noise was overwhelming. For 30 minutes, thousands of shells crashed into bunkers, gun positions, and beach obstacles. German defenders, many of whom had been sleeping peacefully hours earlier, now huddled in bunkers as high-explosive shells detonated around them. At 6:30 a.m., the first wave of landing craft touched down on Utah Beach, the westernmost American landing site. Utah, located on the Cotentin Peninsula, was intended to link up with the airborne forces and provide a base for capturing the vital port of Cherbourg. Due to strong currents, the landing craft drifted south of their intended landing zone, a fortunate accident, as the actual landing area was less heavily defended than the planned site. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of President Theodore Roosevelt and, at 56, the oldest man in the first wave, led the assault personally, famously deciding to start the war from right here when he realized they had landed in the wrong place. Utah Beach was a success. By the end of D-Day, over 23,000 troops had landed with only 197 casualties, remarkably light losses for an opposed amphibious landing. The forces on Utah linked up with the paratroopers, established a secure beachhead, and began advancing inland. Further east, British and Canadian forces landed on 3 beaches: Gold, Juno, and Sword. These beaches, located between the villages of Arromanches and Ouistreham, were intended to secure the eastern flank of the invasion and capture the critical city of Caen. Gold Beach, assaulted by the 50th Northumbrian Division, saw fierce fighting but achieved its objectives by day's end. Juno Beach, attacked by the 3rd Canadian Division, encountered strong resistance and rough seas that made landing difficult. Canadian casualties were heavy, 340 killed on D-Day, but they pushed inland, advancing further than any other beach force on the first day. Sword Beach, the easternmost landing site, saw British forces come ashore against moderate resistance. They linked up with the airborne forces holding Pegasus Bridge and advanced toward Caen. But determined German resistance, particularly from the 21st Panzer Division, prevented them from capturing Caen on D-Day, a failure that would have significant consequences in the weeks ahead. But between Utah in the west and Gold in the east lay Omaha Beach, a 4-mile stretch of sand and cliffs that would become synonymous with the D-Day invasion and would come the closest to failing completely. Omaha was a killing ground. The beach was overlooked by high bluffs honeycombed with German fortifications, bunkers, machine gun nests, artillery positions, all with clear fields of fire across the beach. The German 352nd Infantry Division, a veteran formation, defended Omaha in strength, far more strength than Allied intelligence had expected. The first wave hit Omaha at 6:30 a.m. Immediately, everything went wrong. The preliminary naval and air bombardment had largely missed the German defenses. Amphibious tanks, launched too far from shore in rough seas, sank before reaching the beach. Landing craft, buffeted by waves, came ashore scattered and disorganized. As the ramps dropped and soldiers waded ashore, German machine guns opened fire. Men were cut down in the water, on the beach, at the water's edge. Landing craft became death traps. Soldiers jumped into water over their heads and drowned under the weight of their equipment. Those who reached the beach found themselves pinned down under murderous fire, unable to advance, unable to retreat. Company after company was decimated. The 116th Infantry Regiment, Virginia National Guard troops landing in the first wave, suffered over 90% casualties in some companies within the first 30 minutes. Officers and NCOs were killed. Radio communications broke down. Units lost cohesion. Bodies piled up at the waterline. The wounded drowned as the tide came in. By mid-morning, Omaha Beach appeared to be a catastrophic failure. Senior commanders offshore considered abandoning Omaha and diverting follow-on waves to Utah and the British beaches. The invasion hung in the balance. But small groups of soldiers, led by junior officers, NCOs, or simply individuals who decided they would rather die moving forward than stay pinned on the beach, began working their way up the bluffs. They used whatever cover they could find: shell craters, the seawall, destroyed vehicles. They attacked German positions with rifles, grenades, and sheer determination. Destroyers moved in close to shore, so close they risked running aground, and fired directly at German positions, suppressing fire and giving the infantry a chance to advance. Combat engineers, despite heavy casualties, blew gaps in German obstacles. Gradually, painfully, Americans established footholds on the bluffs and began reducing German positions. By day's end, Omaha had been secured, barely. Over 2,400 American casualties, including approximately 1,000 killed. It was the costliest of the D-Day beaches, and it had come within a hair of complete failure. But the landings, however costly, had succeeded. By the end of June 6, 1944, approximately 156,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy. 73,000 Americans, 83,000 British and Canadians. They had secured 5 separate beachheads stretching along 50 miles of Norman coast. Allied casualties for D-Day are estimated at approximately 10,000, including 4,400 confirmed dead, heavy losses, but far lighter than the worst-case estimates. German casualties are harder to calculate but were significant, perhaps 4,000 to 9,000 killed, wounded, or captured on D-Day itself. But landing the troops was only the beginning. They had to be supplied with ammunition, food, fuel, medical supplies, and endless streams of reinforcements and equipment. The channel ports were all in German hands and would remain so for weeks. The solution was one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the war: the Mulberry Harbors. These were prefabricated harbors, massive concrete caissons and steel pontoons that had been constructed in Britain, towed across the channel, and assembled off the Normandy coast. Within days, the Mulberries were operational, allowing ships to unload directly without needing to capture a port. Even more ambitious was Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, a fuel pipeline laid across the channel floor to supply the armies with gasoline. Without Pluto, every gallon of fuel would have had to be shipped in drums or tankers, consuming precious shipping capacity. With Pluto, fuel flowed continuously, keeping the Allied armies mobile. These logistical marvels, the Mulberries, Pluto, the careful stockpiling of supplies in Britain, the organization of the vast shipping fleet, were as crucial to the invasion's success as the fighting on the beaches. By June 7th, the beachheads were secure. Allied forces were expanding inland, pushing back German counterattacks, establishing defensive positions. The invasion had succeeded. The second front was open. Hitler's Atlantic Wall had been breached. But breaching the wall and breaking out of Normandy were different challenges. The next phase of the battle, the fight for the Norman hedgerows, the struggle for Cannes, the slow, grinding advance toward a breakout, would prove just as costly and would take far longer than Allied planners had expected. The liberation of France had begun, but it would be bought at a terrible price. In the days following D-Day, Allied forces consolidated their beachheads and began pushing inland. The initial objectives, ambitious plans to capture Cannes on D-Day, to push deep into the Norman interior, to break out rapidly before German reinforcements arrived, had not been achieved. Instead, the Battle of Normandy settled into a grinding attritional struggle that would last through June, July, and into August. The Allied lodgment area by mid-June was a continuous front stretching from the Cotentin Peninsula in the west to Cannes in the east, approximately 60 miles wide but only 10 to 20 miles deep in most places. Over 1 million Allied troops, along with thousands of vehicles and hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies, were crowded into this relatively small area. Breaking out of this lodgment would prove far more difficult than landing had been. The German defensive strategy, as it evolved through June, was to hold the British and Canadians near Caen in the east while containing the Americans in the west. Caen was crucial, a major road junction and the key to the relatively open terrain beyond, where Allied armor could maneuver. If the British captured Caen and broke into the open country beyond, German defenses in Normandy might collapse. Therefore, Rommel and his commanders concentrated the bulk of their panzer divisions, including the elite SS panzer divisions, opposite the British around Caen. These forces would form an anvil against which the British would batter themselves, preventing a breakthrough. Meanwhile, German infantry divisions would hold the Americans in the west, where the terrain, dense hedgerows, narrow lanes, small fields, favored the defender and negated Allied advantages in armor and mobility. This terrain, the bocage, became one of the defining features of the Normandy campaign. The bocage was ancient farmland, divided into thousands of small fields, each surrounded by thick hedgerows, earthen banks topped with dense vegetation, trees and brambles, sometimes 10 feet high and several feet thick. For attacking forces, the bocage was a nightmare. Each field became a separate battlefield. Tanks advancing along the narrow lanes between hedgerows were vulnerable to German Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons fired from ambush positions. Infantry attempting to advance across fields had to cross through or over the hedgerows, exposing themselves to machine gun fire. German defenders, often in squad or platoon-sized groups, would position themselves in hedgerows with excellent fields of fire, fight until Allied forces threatened to overrun them, then retreat to the next hedgerow, a few hundred yards back, and repeat. Progress was measured in fields per day, with heavy casualties for each field captured. Allied air superiority, so dominant in open terrain, was less effective in the bocage. Close air support could hit specific targets, but distinguishing friend from foe in the dense terrain was nearly impossible. Allied armor, which should have been decisive, found itself channeled along narrow lanes, unable to maneuver, vulnerable to ambush. The bocage fighting was infantry combat at its most brutal. Close-range firefights, hand grenades, small unit tactics, attrition warfare where success was measured in hundreds of yards and casualties mounted steadily. Meanwhile, around Caen, the British and Canadians launched a series of operations aimed at capturing the city and breaking through to the open country beyond. Operation Epsom, June 26th to 30th, attempted to encircle Caen from the west. It achieved some gains but failed to capture the city. Operation Windsor, July 4th to 5th, captured Carpiquet airfield west of Caen but at heavy cost. Finally, Operation Charnwood, July 8th to 9th, captured the northern part of Caen after intense urban fighting, but German forces withdrew to the southern suburbs and held there. The city Montgomery had hoped to capture on D-Day was only partially liberated over a month later, and the open country beyond remained out of reach. The slow pace of advance frustrated Allied commanders and raised questions about Montgomery's leadership. Was he being too cautious? Should more aggressive tactics be employed? Could the bocage be overcome with different methods? But Montgomery argued that his strategy was working, that by holding the bulk of German armor around Caen, he was enabling the Americans in the west to build up strength for a decisive breakout operation. The British and Canadians were the anvil, absorbing German counterattacks and holding the best German divisions in place. The Americans would be the hammer, breaking through in the west and encircling German forces. In the American sector, General Omar Bradley, commanding the 1st U.S. Army, prepared for this hammer blow. The objective was St. Lo, a key road junction in the center of the American line. Capturing St. Lo would position American forces for a breakout operation into the more open country beyond. The advance towards St. Lo through July was costly and slow. American infantry divisions fought through the bocage field by field, hedgerow by hedgerow. Casualties mounted. The 29th and 30th Infantry Divisions suffered particularly heavy losses. But gradually, methodically, the Americans ground forward. American ingenuity helped overcome some of the bocage challenges. Sergeant Curtis G. Cullen of the 2nd Armored Division developed a simple device, steel prongs welded to the front of a tank, like tusks, that allowed tanks to punch through hedgerows rather than having to climb over them, where they exposed their vulnerable belly armor. The Rhino tanks, as they became known, were rapidly adopted throughout American armored units, giving them much better mobility in the bocage. On July 18th, St. Lo fell to American forces after weeks of bitter fighting. The way was now clear for the breakout operation. But before it could begin, the British launched one more major operation around Cannes, Operation Goodwood, that would prove controversial and costly. Operation Goodwood, July 18th to 20th, was Montgomery's attempt to break through east of Cannes using massed armor. 3 armored divisions attacking in close coordination, supported by the heaviest aerial bombardment yet employed in support of ground forces. Over 2,000 Allied heavy bombers attacked German positions, dropping 7,000 tons of bombs. But the attack, despite initial success, was stopped by German defenses in depth. British armor advanced several miles but encountered layered German anti-tank positions, 88mm guns, dug-in tanks, infantry with Panzerfaust weapons that destroyed British tanks faster than they could advance. By the end of Goodwood, the British had suffered over 400 tanks destroyed or damaged and approximately 5,500 casualties. Goodwood was seen by many as a failure, an overly ambitious operation that achieved limited gains at high cost. But it also achieved Montgomery's strategic objective. It drew German reserves, particularly panzer divisions, to the Cairns sector, weakening the line in the west where the Americans were preparing to break out. That American operation, Operation Cobra, was scheduled for late July. It would be the decisive blow that would crack open German defenses and transform the Battle of Normandy from attritional warfare into mobile operations. But Cobra's success would depend on precise coordination, massive firepower, and the leadership of a general who was about to take center stage, George S. Patton. Patton had been held in reserve since D-Day, his Third Army not yet committed to battle. The Germans, still believing the Fortitude deception, thought Patton would lead the real invasion at Calais. Keeping him out of the line reinforced that deception. But in late July, Patton would finally be unleashed, and his drive across France would become legendary. The plan for Cobra was to use overwhelming air and artillery power to blast a hole in German lines west of St. Lo, then pour armor through the gap before German forces could recover. Over 1,500 heavy bombers and 380 medium bombers would carpet bomb a narrow corridor, destroying everything in a concentrated kill zone. Then American armor, led by 7 Corps under General J. Lawton Collins, would attack through the devastated area and break into open country. Weather delayed Cobra until July 25th. When it finally began, the aerial bombardment was devastating, but not perfect. Some bombs fell short, hitting American positions and killing American soldiers, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater. But the German defenders suffered far worse. Entire units were obliterated, communications destroyed, survivors stunned and disoriented. When American armor attacked through the bombed corridor, German resistance was initially fierce but quickly crumbled. By July 27th, American forces had broken through the German main line of resistance. By July 28th, they had captured Coutances and were pushing west toward Avranches, the gateway to Brittany and to open country where American armor could maneuver freely. On July 30th, American forces captured Avranches, and Patton's Third Army became operational. Patton, finally unleashed after weeks of waiting, sent his armor streaming through the Avranches corridor, for divisions passing through a single road junction in 72 hours, and fanning out into Brittany and toward the Seine. The breakout had succeeded. The Battle of Normandy was entering its final, decisive phase. The Germans, facing collapse in the west and continued pressure around Caen in the east, faced a critical decision: withdraw to more defensible positions or counterattack and attempt to cut off the American breakout at Avranches. Hitler, characteristically, ordered a counterattack. It would be a catastrophic decision that would seal the fate of German forces in Normandy. Hitler's order for a counterattack, Operation Overlord, was strategically insane but tactically understandable. If German panzer divisions could drive west to Avranches and cut the narrow corridor through which Patton's Third Army was pouring, the American breakout would be stopped. American forces south and west of the cut would be isolated, vulnerable to destruction. On August 7, 1944, German forces attacked near Mortain with 4 panzer divisions, approximately 250 tanks, driving west toward Avranches. But the Germans achieved no surprise. Allied intelligence, reading German communications through Ultra, knew the attack was coming. American forces were positioned to meet it. More critically, Allied air power was waiting. As German armor advanced, Allied fighter bombers, Typhoons, Thunderbolts, Mustangs attacked relentlessly. The Typhoons, armed with rockets, were particularly devastating against German armor. Tank after tank was destroyed or disabled. German forces made some initial gains but were stopped well short of Avranches. By August 8, the German counterattack had failed completely, and German forces were retreating eastward, pursued by American armor and under constant air attack. But the German counterattack had created an opportunity for the Allies, a chance to trap and destroy the entire German force in Normandy. While German panzer divisions had driven west toward Mortain, Patton's Third Army had been racing east and north, swinging around the German southern flank. Canadian and Polish forces were pushing south from Caen. The possibility existed to encircle the bulk of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army in a pocket centered on the town of Falaise. The Falaise Pocket, as it became known, would be the final act of the Battle of Normandy, and one of the most devastating defeats suffered by German arms in the entire war. As German commanders belatedly recognized their danger and began withdrawing eastward, Allied forces closed in from 3 sides. Canadian and Polish forces pushed south toward Falaise. American forces swung north from the south. British forces pressed from the west. The pocket shrank day by day, compressing German forces into an increasingly small area. Inside the pocket, conditions were nightmarish. Allied fighter bombers attacked anything that moved: tanks, trucks, horses, soldiers on foot. Artillery fire poured into the shrinking German positions. The roads became clogged with destroyed vehicles, dead horses, and bodies. Survivors spoke of it as a corridor of death, miles of destruction where German units simply ceased to exist. Some German forces escaped before the pocket closed. Perhaps 20,000 to 40,000 managed to slip through the gap between Canadian and American forces near Chamboy before it was finally sealed on August 21st. But approximately 50,000 Germans were captured in the pocket, and 10,000 to 15,000 were killed. The material losses were staggering: hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, entire divisions worth of equipment abandoned or destroyed. The scenes in the Falaise Pocket after the battle were apocalyptic. General Eisenhower, visiting shortly after, wrote that the destruction was one of the greatest killing grounds of any of the war areas. Bodies and destroyed equipment lay so thick that bulldozers were needed to clear the roads. The closing of the Falaise Pocket effectively ended the Battle of Normandy. German forces in France were shattered. Those that had escaped were retreating in disorder toward the Seine River and the German border. The Allied armies, now fully mobile, pursued rapidly. On August 25, 1944, Allied forces, led by Free French units given the honor of entering first, liberated Paris. The French capital, occupied for over 4 years, was free. General Charles de Gaulle, leader of Free France, entered the city in triumph and established a provisional government. By the end of August 1944, the Battle of Normandy was over. The German army in the west was catastrophically defeated, having lost over 450,000 men and virtually all its heavy equipment. The path to Paris, and then to Germany, was open. The cost was immense for the Allies too, with over 200,000 casualties. But the strategic success was absolute. Operation Overlord had secured a permanent foothold in France, relieved the pressure on the Eastern Front, and irrevocably sealed the fate of Nazi Germany. Normandy stands as a testament to the greatest combined arms operation ever conceived, a triumph of meticulous planning, overwhelming industrial might, and the extraordinary courage of those who fought on the beaches and in the treacherous bocage. If you want to understand the monumental turning points and the enduring lessons of human conflict, make sure you subscribe to History of Conflicts. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment below. We want to know, do you believe the success of Operation Fortitude, the Allied deception plan, was as crucial to the D-Day landings as the fighting on the beaches themselves? Thanks for watching.